Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa Evangelista. I'm an MFA intern, and I will be your host for tonight's Wil Talk with Artists. Our digital discussion tonight was painter Katie Rickman. Katie Rickman is a retired educator and is now a full-time artist. Her passion for both of these things was sparked by her high school art teacher who helped her see the world through the eyes of an artist. She is drawn to contrasting elements such as light and shadow and smooth and textured surfaces. Her inspirations derive from various things in her daily life that catch her eye. These things include cloud formations, the curve of a road, how light hits a form, and much, much more. Additionally, I would like to introduce the host of our show, Wil Scott. Wil is an art historian with an extensive career as a photographer and the former head of adult programs in the National Gallery of Art. He is uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between artists and the public.
Thank you, Marissa. And thank you, Katie, for agreeing to subject yourself to this torture. Well, I hope it's going to be fun. It's been very nice getting to know you and talking with you in preparation for tonight. Welcome to everybody. I see old familiar faces and one or two new faces, so that's great. Let's jump right in and get started. And we'll pick up on that note of Katie's experience as an educator. I'm always struck by the number of artists that I've interviewed in this series who either are educators and are working in their studios or have made the transition. So, Katie, does your experience as an educator in any way affect your art? And is it still with you even though you're recently retired from teaching in the classroom?
Well, one of the things that I loved about teaching was I feel like it's a really similar kind of brain. Like, for example, I got a fish, technically it's called betta, not beta, but like the Siamese.
Yeah. Siamese fighter.
And I got one of those and I went and I did a project with my ninth graders they had to make a fish, and I talked about the biology, and because I love biology, how the structure of the fish. And then we talked about Buddhism, and we made a Buddhist temple design, like an underwater design for the back of it. So, and then more recently, I have a series of 12 or so fish paintings from pictures I took. So I found that it went back and forth. Whatever I was working on at home, I get this new idea, and oh my gosh, I can't wait to try this with the kids. Does it go the other way? I don't know. I think sometimes I would try a new material at school and then, wonder what I could do with it. I do sometimes save bits and pieces of student artwork or whatever I would find around the classroom and incorporate that into collage work.
Yeah, well, I don't know. As an artist, I always find that it's, well, not always, but very often it's enriching when you talk to somebody else or you're trying to encourage somebody else to do something creative that helps you while you do that. So the last thing I want to touch on in that regard is, do you feel that you're now sort of liberated and you have more energy in the studio because you don't have the teaching responsibilities?
Yes, most definitely. One of the other neat things, I was working with high school students, and so my juniors and seniors were more advanced, and we would bounce ideas off of each other. I'd see them trying something. Oh, I really like what so-and-so did today, and vice versa. Yeah. I'm homeschooling my son, so I have some teaching going on, but I don't know. I've always liked working in series, and I feel like a lot of the same things, a lot of my planning, and the two have been tied together for most of my life. So they're really connected for me. I don't remember if I answered your question or not.
No,
I got nostalgic for a minute there.
Well, I'm pretty sure that you're new to membership in the MFA.
Yes.
And I hope that you'll continue to submit to our shows. Your work, I think, is very energetic and interesting. And I hope that'll sort of provide that outlet and, other artists and people you can talk with. So let's start to look at your work now. It's interesting in a number of ways to me. So in the introduction, Katie, Marissa mentioned that you were at MICA, you studied at MICA. Was painting what you primarily were interested in when you began your studies?
Yes, painting was my major. I started landscape painting when I was a sophomore in high school, and that just has always been something I loved.
Why did you decide on landscape painting and the media of painting itself?
That's a good question. I think my teacher that I had was a painter, is a painter. And so that was we did some drawings and I just fell in love with painting. My grandmother on my mom's side was a plein air painter in Litchfield, Connecticut. And I always liked having her artwork around. I did a lot of plein air painting until I had my son, and then my hours were not as easy to schedule.
Mhm.
So I started working more from photographs. I love the natural with the, like, especially roads and bridges I've always loved.
This image on the way home, the title, of course, is very evocative, but it is late in the day. You have a wonderful way of handling that the golden hour, photographers call it. You've really captured that. Were there any particular painters other than your teacher who you've been influenced by?
Well, the first painter I really fell in love with was Eugene Budleek. And he, at the time, he was still exhibiting when Baltimore had the first Thursdays on the gallery. So I actually got to
Mhm.
meet him, and was a plein air painter. I just loved the way I feel like the way I look at trees is still highly influenced by him. My favorite time to paint is dusk. I just love how the things kind of meld together and you get that
Mhm.
piece sort of thing going on.
Well, you mentioned you had your grandmother, I think, who lived in
Yes.
Connecticut, in Litchfield.
Yes.
Well, that's an area where there's always been a lot of plein air landscape type of painting. Were you influenced by any of the 19th century or early 20th century painters that you might have seen in galleries or museums around that area?
I never went to galleries or museums up there. That's an interesting question. My grandmother passed away when I was at the end of college. So I don't think I would have had a lot of opportunities, but now that you mentioned that, I'm going to do some research.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I also loved Mark Carnes at MICA. He was one of my big painting influencers, and Jim Hennessy.
yeah. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about this and this image. How do you decide? This is an interesting subject. I, as a photographer, like roads. I'm fascinated by the patterns, compositions you can build around the road markings and all that sort of thing. So what made you choose this particular subject?
I don't know if everybody's from Maryland, but this part of Maryland, I'm in the Baltimore area. There are a lot of rolling hills. So this is one of the high points in the neighborhood, and then it goes down and then up again. You can see in the background. So this is a road I drive down on a regular basis. I live near where I grew up, so I've been passing this intersection for many years. I loved the way the light was hitting the power lines. It looks like cobwebs, with the light hitting the cobwebs. And yeah, I pulled over. You see, I pulled over on the side of the road. I try not to take pictures when I'm driving. I try to pull over unless it's a stoplight. I love the way lines on the street and power lines both. I like the geometric against the natural, and I like the way they lead you into the space.
Oh yeah, yeah. The composition's very fine, I think. Are you deliberately being nostalgic or sentimental, in the best sense of the word? You're trying to evoke, share an emotion that you have on the way home is very evocative, I think, as a title.
I think this honestly was a literal, this is on my way home, and
Okay.
it's kind of the end of the day. And
Yeah.
I don't know that I was really thinking of that particularly. It's a literal, this is on my way home. And yeah, I guess so.
Is it more typical of you to see something where it's the composition, it's the light, it's the color, so it's what you're visually encountering rather than thinking, oh, I'm sort of want to find a way to express this feeling or emotion? What comes first?
Great question. In landscape, I walk past something or I drive past something, I think I need to paint that.
Yeah.
When I do figurative work, I definitely have an emotion or an idea that I'm trying to get across.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see the next image, Marissa. This is where I really need you, Katie, to help us work through this, because I have a dog. I love dogs. Lots of people love dogs. Bella's world does kind of speak for itself, but let's jump in first with the mixed media approach. How did you develop this approach? Because it's almost as though you're disguising to some degree the fabric and the doilies and such. It's a painting, and I could almost imagine you just having a distinctive way of working that would make these patterns that the fabrics have made.
I painted this one. This was right at the beginning of pandemic when we were all afraid to go out of the house because nobody really knew how COVID was spread. And I took a walk with my dog. I just had been cooped up. I took a walk with my dog, And this is actually along Seminary Avenue where the previous one was. Right past that pink tree is that same road. I walked, that's one of the highest, as I said, one of the highest points in the neighborhood. And I just went up there because I needed some space. And the Bella's World was a nod to Christina's World.
Yeah.
I couldn't resist that one. This isn't the first piece I had done. I think I started with using fabric more as like, I'm going to cut this fabric and that's the leaves or that's the tree branch, that kind of thing. This is the first one where I was really thinking of it as textures in the space. And yeah, I love vintage doilies. Most of them were made by hand by some woman at some point. The part above the dog's head that's more smooth is a vintage tie. I love the texture on those. And I love the masculine feminine, even though it's not necessarily obvious in here. I make a basic outline of where I'm headed. And then I've started painting the canvas and then putting the doilies on top of it because it's really hard to squish the paint into all those holes if you don't do that first. But I learned as I went along. So I just would take whatever materials and I kind of did more texture toward the foreground and smoother as it went back, kind of lay that all out there. And yeah, and I like the idea of sizing it. I like the idea of painting over it.
So the fabric becomes a little bit of a shorthand, but you've disguised it in a way so that it's not obvious. And it does seem to be, integral to what you're doing. And I think that's, to me, that seems very hard to do because you're working with the two different media and you're thinking of that and making it all coalesce together. I love collage and things like that, but sometimes they fragment. And this, you've made it so unified, so cohesive. I think that's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you. It's interesting sometimes because the fabric wants to come forward. Sometimes I get stuck thinking, okay, I have to use the fabric to do this. Like, wait a minute, I'm a painter. I know how to create space. So it's kind of a fun way to play with, am I pushing it back, even though it's textured, like the pink tree in the background is as textured as the grass. Am I pushing it back into the space and still creating a space, or is it jumping out of the canvas? So I love that challenge.
Yeah, well, that was a very nice way of articulating what I was trying to formulate more clumsily. You've really made it integral.
No.
And it's not fighting for
I don't have the energy.
overwhelming the paint. I love this. This is just, there is so much to see and to think about. So why don't you help us, dive in.
This is a lot. This one I started, this is really interesting. Right at the beginning of COVID, MFA was doing a show, I think it was called Women. I started this for that, and I was trying to figure out, because I'm not a particularly feminine person. So I was thinking, okay, how do I want to portray myself? And I like, how do I want to present myself? What kind of woman am I? What does woman mean? I was having this whole big conversation inside of my head. It actually took me 2 years to finish this, and I finished it for the Fibers exhibit. Right beginning of COVID, I was working on processing some traumas from college, and I had this vision of myself reaching back to my younger self, and I had this robe, like a cape, I guess more of a cape, that was really colorful. I imagined myself kind of swishing into the space and enveloping my younger self. So this went through a lot of different pieces. Woman of Voices is a reference to a Dar Williams song, where in the song she talks about this woman who was kind of fending off all these voices and the stuff she didn't want to deal with emotionally, and she learns to embrace it, and all of a sudden those voices become violins and timpani and cellos. So this picture in the back, in the window, in that blue window there, is a collage I made from one of those daily challenge art things, and it was something to do with music. So anyway, I made that for that, and I listened to that song on repeat the whole time I was painting this. So I had the jacket. It took me a really long time to figure out what kind of gesture I wanted to make. I knew I had the stars. When I was in college, I went to Sorrento, Italy, and there were all these Madonna alcoves, and they all had these what looked like plastic Christmas lights, star Christmas lights around the head. So I wanted a reference to that. I loved that image. So that's a blue doily that I cut up, and I had bought the red and blue fabrics for something else that I was going to do, and they just all kind of, I loved that color combination. And the red hope on the left hand side, that comes from an image. So when I was living in the dorms, and going through a really difficult, isolated time, there was a house diagonally across the street on Mount Royal Avenue. I saw the back of it, and they had these red Christmas lights on the fire escape. So I remember I would go out at night and I would look at them. Okay, the lights are there. So they were this beacon of hope in a really dark time, basically. So there was this beacon of hope there. And I also remember looking out the window, being at friends' houses or in class and looking out the window, and that's the sky gets that incredible royal blue before darkness really falls. So those are the red Christmas lights in that royal blue sky. So that was actually another painting that I ripped up and put in there. And then I was working on, I figured out that it was kind of an invitation. I was inviting, I didn't know this was inviting my former self, but I was kind of inviting, hence the gesture. I was trying to figure out, am I saying it's going to be okay? It gets better. What am I saying? So I realized it was an invitation. And then I saw African-American artist who has a number of things where he's cut the canvas and revealed something, like cut a person out of it, or he was cutting things out of the canvas. So I split the jacket, and I had this piece, that's a piece of me looking out, standing in a bathroom, looking out the door, the hallway. There's a mirror in the hallway. So the light that's right under my chin there, that's the light above the mirror in the bathroom. And I had that white button on my jacket in the painting. So I cut that, split that open. I tore the painting off the stretcher bars, and I was like, I know what I need to do with this. So I put it in there. So this has kind of become a me embracing that former self.
So this is intensely autobiographical.
This is the most intensely autobiographical thing I've ever done, which is why it took me 2 years. I had to figure out what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And everything in there is really
well. You've packed a lot in there, and I think that it's easy for some artists to think of themselves and how they want to project themselves in their work, but then they don't necessarily reach that next level, which is something that is open to other people to relate to. The hope, of course, is kind of the key to that in this image, I feel. But I think you've made a really strong image that a lot of people can relate to. Plus, there's all the visual fascination of just sort of working your way through it and seeing what's happening. I think of the things that you've shown me, this is the one that is the most impressive and has a really strong impact.
And it's about life size too.
Yeah, well, that of course helps.
I wanted it to be big because I wanted it to really bring you into it.
Yeah, I saw it in the fiber show, and you can't walk by it.
Yeah,
you can't. You have to engage with it. So that's great. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a lot different, but I feel like you're dealing with some of the same kind of personal issues.
Yes.
I can't ferret that out without sounding really silly. So how about you help us?
Well, I didn't intend for the red and blue to be in here again. I just had a red shirt. I think I was taking a picture of my hand. I needed my hand for something, and I was playing with a curtain. Anyway, so that just some of it kind of came together as a happy accident. And it was nighttime. I was taking pictures in the bathroom, and the bathroom window was dark. So I ended up getting this great reflection in the bathroom. I was just going for my hand at the time. The blue on the right-hand side is a piece of a canvas that I found in my classroom, and it has little, really subtle rainbows on it. So this one I made when I was trying to decide figure out if I was leaving.
Teaching.
Leaving my school. Yeah, leaving teaching. I felt like I could no longer really be myself at my school. And there were things that a lot of schools are dealing with. Teenagers are exploring gender pronouns a lot, and sexuality, sexual orientation, and then we have this conservative backlash going on. So there's a real tension, I think, in a lot of schools, and how to support these teenagers, and kids they're coming out earlier and earlier. And as a queer person, I couldn't be in the middle of that anymore at that school. So the fabric there, that's a piece of fabric. It's kind of a netting. I love working with clothing also. I like the history of fabric. I like the buttons and the zippers and the pockets and all that kind of stuff. So that was actually a t-shirt I found at the Goodwill. It's not very obvious, but it was kind of rainbowy colors in there. So it's kind of pulling back the curtain and what parts of myself do I want to express. The middle section where the painting was an old canvas that I painted over, and I actually left bits and pieces like the blue. around the light, the dark there, that was from the original painting. There's some bits and pieces of the original showing through, and I liked the layers. I liked the new and the old and the history of that.
You've talked about how clothing is of great interest to you, and then you just said you were interested in layers, and I hope I'm not being too personal, and just tell me if I am, but clothing is the way we choose our clothing. Usually when we are going out of our home, we choose our clothing so that we present ourselves in a way that we want to present ourselves to the rest of the world.
Yes.
And you're talking about identity issues.
Yes.
Is that consciously something you're doing here?
Not in that one. Identity issues and clothing. And I was working in a school that had 2 single gender schools on the campus. So dealing with kids that don't fit that binary was a really interesting challenge. And what am I allowed to wear to school and that kind of thing. So that was in the back of my mind. I don't think I was thinking of that with that. I just liked the fabric.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all in the back of my mind. So certainly.
Yeah. Well, and this is, for an art historian, this and the way you described the image and the way you talked about it is a little like some of the surrealists, I think, in the 20th century. They're exploring what's beneath the surface. And through their art, they're finding ways to bring it to the surface and let others engage with what they're thinking about. So again, I'm finding a depth. It's almost as we look at your work and you talk about it, I feel like it's kind of like a fan opening up, and we're finding out more about you and about your work. So it's certainly interesting for me, and I'm pretty sure it's interesting for our audience. At least I'm counting on it being interesting to our audience.
Hope so.
Okay, the next image, please, Marissa.
Okay, so this is a Henry David Thoreau quote from Walden. It seemed to me that I had several more lives to live and could not spare any more time for that one. So that's when he's been in the woods, and he's, he wanted to go to the woods, and he had this amazing idea, and I really want to explore this. Then he was like, you know what? That was great. And now it's time to move on. I have the blue of the night sky. That's me in the background. I have red Christmas lights draped around me. So that's that beacon of hope. And then I have the lights obviously in the foreground. So this is fabric, and Jackie is actually painted on mat board that I attached onto there. The reflection is one piece of mat board. The one close to us is another piece of mat board. So she posed for me. I actually had a sketch of a roommate of mine in this pose looking in the mirror when I was in college. And I originally was going to paint that one, but that time that I was referencing was a really dark time. And there was a lot of, I love Diebenkorn. So there was a lot of Diebenkorn in the arrangement with the geometry in this. So I was struggling. And then I realized I need a different model. So I set Jackie up in there. And to me, she's a really, really powerful person. You see, she has a sleeve of tattoos.
Yeah.
She just was different from anybody I had known. And it's just sometimes somebody walks into your life. I didn't know I needed a Jackie in my life. And she just came at a time where I was going through a lot of transitions. And I find her to be very strong and a powerful force in my life. So she ended up leaving the school as well.
So she's a friend and a colleague. And do you feel like you've painted her portrait?
Yes.
Okay. And so the relationship of the image of Jackie and your own image behind the text is very important to understanding this.
Yeah.
How do you get that across to somebody who's just seeing your work hanging on the wall in a gallery? Because this is a very interesting work, just visually, but that's a lot of stuff that's packed in there that is really important and heavy almost. Are you concerned about whether people are really understanding it, or are you comfortable letting each person engage and take what they can from it?
I think I could have a title that was more evocative. I didn't really think much about this title. It was just a painting of Jackie. I think including more of that in the title would focus that. I think that quote was running through my mind. The Thoreau quote was running through my mind a lot for the last 6 months. So it said everything I needed it to say. That's a really good question, though, as far as what what other people see in it.
What made me ask that question was because I think there is so much that's rich and interesting and significant in your explanation. And, Picasso he was notorious for having the press ask him a question and he'd be deliberately misleading or more often just inscrutable. He would give you some kind of answer that he was such a formalist that if you appreciated what he was doing in terms of revolutionizing the art of painting, he was happy to let you make your own meaning. This sounds like you have a very important thing to say about yourself or about being a woman at this particular time in the world. I don't know what I would do if I've had something that I don't create things that have this kind of intense content. I don't know what I would do with it, but I'm thank you for talking about it and sharing that.
I think for me, a lot of what I'm doing is journaling. It's like a visual journal. So I had these things in my head that I needed to get out. And I don't know that I thought a whole lot about what other people would get out of it.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense to my own clumsy metaphor of the fan. It's like I'm going through the process of getting to know you, and I think you're going through the process of getting to know you and your work.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been the last couple of years, has been a real self-discovery.
It's fascinating. It really is. So let's look at another one, please.
Okay, this one, when I went on that great trip to Italy, that was with Jim Hennessy, was one of my favorite teachers at MICA, and he was the one taking us to all these amazing museums and whatnot. There's an image in Pompeii, there's a fresco that's said to be Sappho, and people
I know the one you mean.
Say that's not true or whatever. Anyway, so I got a postcard while I was there. I think it was in Naples. And I've had it in my studio, and I'm looking over at it right now. So she has a bluish green coat. She has a blue background, and she's got pencils in her hand because she's a writer. Or maybe she has a book in one hand and something to write with in the other. And she has a hat that reminded me of a colander. So I put a colander on my head, and yeah, that's me, Sappho the painter. I couldn't resist that. I was having fun exploring identity, and I was like, I got to do a Sappho, the world famous lesbian. I got to do a portrait.
Yeah.
Poking fun at that, or just poking at it.
Well, yeah, as an art historian, as soon as I saw it, I thought of that the mosaic or mural, what you were talking about, and it's just, I love this. This is tremendous. That kind of layering of your own personal life experiences and your role as a painter with mythology and this great woman, female figure from the ancient world. So kudos to you. Well, let's cue up the next.
Oh, there's Jackie again. So she bought herself a crystal tiara. This was a total impulse buy. She loves crystals, is like the new agey kind of stuff. So she bought this crystal tiara, and she sent me a picture of herself in this, what looks like some funky little store. And I got to paint this.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure what I was doing with it. It had so many layers. Like there's the reflection of the street outside the windows. She always wears a necklace with a crescent moon on it. There are just so many things in there. And I just thought, I've got to have fun with this. So here I am having fun again. So her skin is matte board. Her glasses are matte board. The hair is ties. The t-shirt that she's wearing is an actual t-shirt I cut up. I made the little dress. I knew I wanted that yellow dress was really prominent in the picture. So I actually made like a little doll-sized dress.
Mm-hmm.
There's paper clips. There's all kinds of little odds and ends. I went and got the rocks that I used on her tiara are flat stones that I got. And I just had a blast making this.
It is fun. That comes through. But it also is intriguing to me because it's in this kind of space between painting and collage and even, relief sculpture almost. So that's something I've not seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of art. So I think this sort of playfulness, this fun, as you have called it, is all there in a strikingly original way. I mean, you're really doing a lot of things in the few months since you've left teaching. So you got a lot of momentum. I hope you keep it going.
Interestingly too, I mean, I knew what the fabrics I wanted were, and very few of them were the colors that I ended up with. So like, for instance, the white and kind of black and gray and the picture frame all on the left-hand side, they were all white when I put them on there, and I painted over it. And so I liked the dress was just a bright yellow, and then I aged it. I painted the hats in the top right. That's something I painted on. Most of it is the bricks in the back. That's something that I painted. Most of this one is actually mostly fabric, and then I changed the colors or just kind of pushed and pulled. I bring this forward, push this back, kind of a thing. That brings me great joy working on something like that.
Yeah. This is very dynamic on multiple levels. Katie, I mean, I think your work is really exciting, really interesting. As I just said, I think you've got a lot of momentum going here, and I hope you keep up with that because I'm anxious to see what you can do with that. Let's see if there are any questions about your subjects, your themes, or your materials.
Currently, there are no questions, but Katie, I also want to say that I feel like your emotions and your pieces that are more about yourself really come through to me too. And I think it's so beautiful to me. And as a young artist who's still learning about a lot of different things, it really inspires me to keep on just putting out my emotions there, not being afraid to share them, but also not being afraid to try new things too, like how you include so many different things in your pieces. And I just think that's so cool. And I'm so excited to see how you continue that in the future.
Marissa, I think I saw Kathy wave her hand. Not Katie, Kathy.
Kathy's an old friend of mine from Barnville. It's really nice to see you.
I was just really happy to see you were interviewing Katie, so I'm tuning in to see what she says.
Oh,
Thank
great.
you.
Well, thank you for doing that, and I hope you're enjoying it.
Jim Mackey would like to say something. Go. I would just like to comment. My video doesn't work, so you can't see me. I don't really want you to see me right. Anyhow, I just want to commend her on her raw honesty. That raw, bare bones, to the heart, into the soul honesty. I commend you on that very much. Thank you.
Jim, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
You read me, Jim. That's me.
I just clicked on the what I saw as a message in the chat, and the question is, does Katie glue the material to the canvas, or does the paint hold it in place?
Great question. Mod Podge. Mod Podge is my friend. I prefer the matte. I find that I have to be careful with it because sometimes it hydroplanes a little bit. Like I'm using acrylic in all of these. The big landscape, the first one was an oil painting, but everything else is acrylic. So I buy Mod Podge by the gallon and I slap it on, and I like the physicality of that. Just like I've got a big fat paintbrush and I'm pushing it on there, and then I put the fabric on and I'm pushing it in. So it's a really physical process for me. And then I like painting over it. I especially love the doilies because there are so many different textures, and the first pieces I did with them, they were like, they just looked like grasses or plants, different plant life and all different shapes, and I had a blast. I used to use them making quilts, like sewn quilts I'd make for people, and I thought, well, why not stick them in my canvas? So one of my favorite things is what if I try this? What if could I throw this in here? What would happen if I love to play.
Yeah. Well, keep that spirit. I think it's serving you very, very well.
I have another question real quick. Since you're now a full-time artist, how do you balance artist block and feeling burnt out if you do?
I have never had artist block. I am very fortunate that I always have a huge bunch of ideas that I can't wait to get to. I've been painting a lot of skies since I've been painting a lot of skies with the horizon pushed really far down because I just needed space. And then I went on to, somebody asked me to make a painting of a Hubble telescope image for somebody as a gift. So I did that, and then it's like, now I want to do, the sky is cool. Space is even bigger. There's no boundaries. And
Great.
So for me, I get one thing just by, like, I did a painting of a sky, and then everywhere I'm looking, oh, I could paint that sky, or maybe I'll go here. So I love to work in a series, and everything sparks another idea. So I have more ideas than time right now.
So it sounds like what your teacher taught you to see the world through the artist's lens, that literally does come through to every single thing.
Yes, I
Yeah,
remember
that's incredible.
biggest thing she talked to us about was, I remember when she first started talking to us, she just said, people were identifying the colors in the shadows. I'm looking at it going, it's gray. Let's slowly, and the color mixing is one of my favorite things.
Mhm.
Slowly it started to click with me. I'm like, okay, now it's not blue, but there's a blue in that gray. And I
Mhm.
started to see that. And that's one of the things I've loved teaching painting to my students, that they start out with it's gray. Just give me black for the shadows. And then to be able to really help them hone their seeing, to really see those subtle colors in there, it's so rewarding.
It's been wonderful talking to you and getting to know you, Katie, and I hope that we'll meet each other at the gallery or someplace. You're a very dynamic person and your work is very dynamic, and I'm anxious to see how it develops.
Thank you.
It doesn't look like there are any more questions, so I'm going to kind of wrap up. Before I do that, I just want to remind everybody that on October the 23rd, our Collector's Choice, our big annual fundraiser, which is really a party, and you get to go home with a work of art. Or if you want to buy more than one ticket, you'll go home with more than one work of art. And we'll have those works that the artist members have donated up on the website. I guess about a week, Marissa, before the event, I will be giving a little talk just sort of to share with everybody what has been submitted and what they might be able to take home with them. And so I hope you'll keep watching for the memos that we send out to keep you up to speed on what's happening with Collector's Choice. So thanks to all of you for listening. Thank you, Katie, for a really lively and wonderful, interesting interview. And Marissa, as always, thanks not just for your technical support, but your input with your questions and your comments. So see you all in 2 weeks, I guess. Marissa, is it 2 weeks?
The next artist we have scheduled is a photographer, Matt Moore, for the 12th of October.
Okay, the 12th.
And that'll be a very exciting discussion as well.
Okay, well, thank you all. Have
Thank
a good
you. It's a
evening.
pleasure meeting everybody. Thanks for
Thank you
coming to
so
listen.
much.
All right.
Have a good night, everyone.